3:11 a.m. Whittle Springs, Tennessee. A housekeeping cart sits outside room 214 on the second-floor walkway of the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge. No towels. No linens. No cleaning supplies. Just sealed cases of bottled water. Adult-size protein bars. Stacked to the railing under a bare bulb that hasn't been changed since the Clinton administration. Grainger County Sheriff's Deputy Caleb Morrow circled the parking lot for the second time and stopped. He'd been chasing a stolen pickup flagged in a Tennessee 10 Most Wanted bulletin, a gray Chevrolet Colorado registered to a Knoxville address that had burned through 3 counties in under 2 hours. The driver had ditched the truck at a pilot pump 5 minutes ago and gone on foot toward the motel's back stairwell. Morrow photographed the cart. 3:14 a.m., the timestamp read on his department-issued phone. He wrote one line in his pocket notebook: "Housekeeping cart, room 214, 0311. No linens. Water and protein bars only. Wrong." He called it in. What he could not have known, what no one on that shift knew, was that behind the wall of room 214, across 5 adjoining rooms with the connecting doors torn out and the drywall stitched back over the frames, 17 young American women had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. The youngest was 22. The longest held had been missing for 133 days. The cart was in evidence by morning. By the following week, a Tennessee 10 Most Wanted fugitive was in federal custody. 3 co-conspirators faced indictment, and the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge had been condemned. It started with 1 deputy. 1 wrong cart. 1 handwritten note. The Whittle Springs Motor Lodge sat on the outskirts of Knoxville off State Highway 33, a 2-story cinder block structure built in the 1980s and never meaningfully updated. 42 rooms. Weekly rates chalked on a plywood board near the office. A diner called Patty's attached at the south end, the kind of place that serves breakfast all day and doesn't ask for a name. An ice machine humming under a bare bulb at the north end of the second-floor walkway. The parking lot had 12 working lights and 4 burned-out ones. It was the kind of motel that exists in American infrastructure the way a storm drain exists. Functional, unremarkable, invisible to anyone not specifically looking. Investigators would later describe it as a deliberate choice. Not random. Selected. The Tennessee 10 Most Wanted sweep that brought Deputy Morrow to that parking lot in the early hours of January 22, 2026, had been in motion for 3 days. The U.S. Marshals Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force had been coordinating with local law enforcement across Knox, Grainger, and Union counties on intelligence, suggesting a Tennessee 10 Most Wanted fugitive, identified in court documents only as Subject Renner, first name withheld pending arraignment, had surfaced in the Knoxville corridor after an 18-month absence from federal radar. Renner had been on the Tennessee 10 Most Wanted list since July 2024, initially sought on federal charges unrelated to what would be discovered at the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge. The original warrant was for conspiracy and interstate flight. No one in the task force at 3 a.m. on January 22nd was expecting anything beyond a fugitive arrest. That expectation lasted approximately 4 hours. Morrow's call reached the Knox County Communications Center at 3:17 a.m. He described the cart. He described the location. He described the driver who had gone up the back stairwell. The dispatcher patched him through to the on-duty sergeant, who contacted the task force duty officer at 3:22 a.m. The task force duty officer, a deputy U.S. Marshal assigned to the Knoxville satellite office, took the call and asked one question. He asked whether the motel's office had been open when Morrow arrived. It had been. A light was on. The duty officer told Morrow to hold position, not approach room 214, and not make contact with the motel office. He was already dialing the task force team leader. What elevated a fugitive chase call into a federal warrant in under 4 hours was not a single piece of surveillance intelligence. It was an accumulation of small contradictions that, once Morrow's photograph of the cart was transmitted at 3:19 a.m., suddenly aligned with something the task force had seen before, but not been able to locate. 3 weeks earlier, on January 3rd, a Knox County patrol officer responding to a noise complaint at a gas station on the opposite side of Highway 33 had run the plates of a panel van idling near the air pump at 2 a.m. The van came back clean. The officer noted in his report that the van carried no visible cargo markings but appeared heavily laden. It sat low on its rear axle. He let it go. The report sat in the county system. After Morrow's call, a task force analyst pulled every incident report within a 1-mile radius of the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge, going back 6 months. The low-riding panel van appeared twice more. Once in November 2025. Once in December 2025. Always between midnight and 4 a.m. Always at the gas station across the highway. The cart, the van, the hours. 3 data points. They pointed at the same building. At 4:51 a.m., a federal magistrate signed a premises warrant for the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge, specifically rooms 212 through 220 on the 2nd floor, and all connected interior spaces. Marshals were already moving. One thing about this case that only becomes visible when you sit with the operational timeline: the investigation that cracked the Whittle Springs cell was not a months-long undercover operation. It was 4 hours and 37 minutes from Morrow's photograph to a signed federal warrant. The system worked fast because Morrow's note was specific. Specific enough that a task force analyst, reviewing county incident reports at 3:40 a.m. from a laptop in a Knoxville parking garage, could connect 3 unrelated patrol records and see something that had been hiding in plain sight for months. The panel van. The low rear axle. The hours. And now the cart. The cart was the thread. Everything else unraveled from it. While the analyst was pulling those incident reports and the duty officer was working the phones, Deputy Morrow remained in position in the parking lot. He had moved his cruiser to the far corner near the entrance of Patty's, headlights off, engine running at idle. For the better part of 40 minutes, he watched the 2nd floor walkway from his driver's seat. He logged what he saw in real time, writing in the same pocket notebook. At 3:26 a.m., he noted that the bare bulb illuminating the cart flickered twice and stabilized. At 3:31 a.m., he noted movement behind the curtain of room 214, a shadow crossing the window from left to right, slow, not hurried. At 3:44 a.m., he noted that the panel curtain in room 216 was completely sealed, no gap at the center, held in place with what appeared to be tape at the bottom edge. In 12 years working patrol across Grainger and Knox counties, Morrow had served process at motels on 4 different occasions. He had knocked on doors at 2 a.m. on domestic disturbance calls at motels in 3 different counties. He told the task force debriefer afterward that he had never seen a motel curtain taped shut from the inside. That detail went into his notebook at 3:44 a.m. and into the task force briefing package at 4:15 a.m. The taped curtain became relevant when the entry team reviewed the thermal imagery at 4:44 a.m. The heat signatures visible through the wall of 214 were not visible through the window of 216. The curtain tape had been applied with enough coverage to block the thermal camera's angle. Someone inside that building understood thermal observation. That understanding, according to the task force team leader's after-action summary, changed the entry calculus from standard protocol to a heightened threat assessment. It also meant that whoever had been managing the rooms knew, at some level, that a camera on a walkway was a possibility they had planned against. A detail worth considering. The motel's weekly rate for 214 was paid in cash every 7 days. The registration card on file listed a business name, Volunteer Property Solutions, LLC, with a Morristown, Tennessee address. Tennessee Secretary of State records showed Volunteer Property Solutions, LLC, had been registered 11 months earlier, in February 2025. It had no listed employees, no website, no business filings beyond the registration itself. The task force would later describe Volunteer Property Solutions as a shell entity built for one function: rent, paid on time, in cash, every 7 days, for 11 months. Do the arithmetic. 11 months of 5 adjoining rooms at a motel that charged weekly rates. The rooms had been continuously occupied since approximately February 2025. The drywall modification, the false walls between rooms 214 and 216, and between 216 and 218, had been installed during the first occupancy window, before the first women arrived. It was infrastructure, built in advance. That means whoever designed this had planned for duration. Put yourself in the position of the task force team leader at 5 a.m. on January 22nd. You have a signed warrant. You have a fugitive who entered the building 90 minutes ago and hasn't come out. You have a set of rooms that have been continuously rented for nearly a year by a shell company with no legitimate business purpose. You have a plumbing diagram pulled from the Knox County building inspector's records, a 1987 as-built drawing of the motel's second-floor plumbing riser that shows a shared drain stack running through the wall between rooms 214 and 216. That wall, according to the 1987 drawing, is a standard partition. No structural load. Roughly 4 inches of drywall and stud, but a thermal camera positioned at the second-floor walkway railing at 4:44 a.m. showed heat signatures through that wall consistent with multiple human bodies. The partition that should have been empty was not empty. The team leader contacted the hostage rescue element pre-staged at the Knox County Sheriff's Office facility on Western Avenue. He transmitted the thermal imagery. He gave the order to move. Before the entry team arrived, the task force ran a quiet records check on the motel's landline and its registered utility accounts. The electric meter for rooms 212 through 220 had been drawing power consistent with 8 to 10 occupied units continuously since March 2025, even during weeks when the motel's ground floor occupancy logs showed fewer than 30 rooms rented. The power consumption didn't match the official guest count. It never had. The utility company had flagged nothing. There was no mechanism in the billing system to cross-reference power draw against occupancy records from a separate business. Another gap. Another thing that was visible only once someone was already looking. The task force also pulled the motel's waste removal records for the south wing. A private hauler serviced a dedicated dumpster at the south end of the property every 4 days. The contract, signed in March 2025 under the Volunteer Property Solutions name, specified pickup intervals 3 times more frequent than the motel's general waste contract, which covered the north wing and ground floor. A 5-room wing generating more frequent waste removal than a 20-room occupied section of the same building. The hauler had noticed nothing unusual. He was contracted for a pickup window. He showed up. He left. Here is where the operational record becomes precise, because the entry team's body cameras were running. 5:42 a.m. First light, gray and flat, coming over the tree line east of Highway 33. Temperature, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. The walkway was glazed with a thin layer of frost. 8 members of the hostage rescue element stacked on the exterior walkway outside room 214. 2 marshals covered the back stairwell. A third team, 3 deputies and a task force marshal, positioned on the ground-level diner entrance at the south end of the building. That team was watching for Renner, who task force intelligence placed inside the diner. The intelligence was correct. Renner had doubled back. He was in the diner, drinking coffee at the counter, at 5:40 a.m. He was taken at 5:44 a.m., 47 seconds before the breach, without incident. He did not resist. He did not speak. He was handcuffed at the diner counter with a half-full coffee mug in front of him and walked to a waiting vehicle. At 5:45 a.m., the hostage rescue element breached room 214. The breach was fast. Entry, clear, and in contact with the modified wall in under 20 seconds. The wall between 214 and 216 was not drywall. It appeared to be drywall. But behind the skim coat was a modified partition with a recessed door frame, no handle on the 214 side. A second entry team, already positioned at the exterior of room 216, breached that door simultaneously. They found the release mechanism, a simple barrel bolt, interior mounted, and the false wall came open in 90 seconds. What the entry team encountered on the other side of that wall was 5 rooms connected by the removed interior doors, the frames covered with the same drywall compound used on the false partition. A continuous space running from 214 to 220, accessed only from 216's exterior door and from the false wall inside 214. 17 young women, housed across the 5-room span. Some in the interior rooms, which had no exterior windows. All were alive. The body camera footage from the first marshal through the false wall lasts 4 minutes and 11 seconds before his camera is manually paused to protect the privacy of the individuals inside. In that 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the camera captures the ambient interior of the modified space. Folding cots arranged in rows. A single overhead fluorescent fixture per room, some with the tubes removed. No natural light in the interior rooms. Plastic storage containers stacked against the shared wall. Cases of the same bottled water that had been stacked on the housekeeping cart outside. The footage is sealed under federal protective order and will not be publicly released prior to trial. The entry team's written report describes the conditions in clinical language consistent with evidence documentation. The written report does not describe what the team members said to the women they found. That is not in the record. The K-9 unit assigned to the operation cleared the ice machine alcove at the north end of the walkway at 5:51 a.m. The dog alerted on a locked utility panel behind the ice machine. Inside the panel, a black ledger, rubber-banded, containing entries in a handwritten shorthand that federal analysts would spend the following week decoding. That ledger would become the backbone of the indictment. Medical personnel were staged in the parking lot. 17 women came down the exterior walkway under space blankets, escorted by marshals. The walkway was 27 steps from room 220 to the parking lot stairwell. The process took 9 minutes. A night shift nurse from Chattanooga had been reported missing 24 days earlier. A woman 4 weeks from her wedding had been reported missing from Bowling Green, Kentucky, 61 days before the raid. A welding student enrolled at a community college outside Roanoke had been reported missing from her apartment on October 6, 2025, 108 days before she walked out of room 218, wrapped in a space blanket in the frost-edged dark of a January morning. All 17 women received immediate on-scene medical evaluation. 9 were transported to University of Tennessee Medical Center. 8 were transported to Physicians Regional Medical Center on the north side of Knoxville. None are named in this account. Federal victim privacy protocols remain in effect. The youngest was 22. The longest held had been gone since October 6th. 108 days. The welding student's name does not appear anywhere in the public record of this case. What the public record does contain is the missing persons report filed on October 7, 2025, by her roommate at the Roanoke apartment they shared. The report describes her as 23 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, brown hair, last seen leaving the apartment on the morning of October 6th, wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a blue canvas backpack. She had a welding practicum that morning. She never arrived. Her car was found 2 days later in the parking lot of a shopping center 4 miles from the apartment. Keys in the center console, phone in the passenger footwell, battery dead. The roommate who filed the report told the Roanoke detective assigned to the case that she had noticed nothing unusual in the days before October 6th. No new contacts. No change in routine. No indication of anything wrong. 108 days later, a Grainger County deputy photographed a housekeeping cart. The night shift nurse from Chattanooga is described in her missing persons report, filed December 29, 2025, as a registered nurse employed by a hospital system in the Hamilton County area, 26 years old, reported missing by a colleague who had expected to meet her for dinner and couldn't reach her by phone. Her vehicle was not located as part of the initial missing persons investigation. The report was entered into the county system and cross-referenced with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation database. No match was generated at the time of filing. The report was still listed as open and unresolved when the raid occurred 24 days later. The woman from Bowling Green, Kentucky, the one 4 weeks from her wedding, had been reported missing on November 22, 2025, by her fiancé. His report, filed with the Bowling Green Police Department, describes her as 24 years old, last seen leaving their apartment on a Saturday morning. She had told him she was driving to a bridal shop to pick up alterations on her dress. The bridal shop has no record of her arrival. Her car was found in a Walmart parking lot 2 miles from the bridal shop 3 days after she was reported missing. Her dress was still at the shop, alterations complete, waiting for pickup. It was picked up by her mother on the afternoon of January 23, 2026, 1 day after the raid. The dress is not part of the case file. It is not evidence of anything. It is a detail that exists outside the record, which is the only place some details can live. What strikes you about this case, and it's something the case file reinforces rather than contradicts, is how long the infrastructure operated without triggering a single formal investigation. 11 months. A shell company registered with the state. Continuous cash rent on 5 adjoining rooms. A panel van making 2 a.m. supply runs across a highway that has a patrol officer assigned to it. 3 separate patrol incidents that were never connected because no one was looking at that block of county incident reports as a whole unit until a deputy photographed a housekeeping cart. The system found it eventually. The question this case keeps raising is what it took to make that happen. The handwritten note Morrow had made at 3:14 a.m. Housekeeping cart, room 214, 0311. No linens. Water and protein bars only. Wrong was entered into evidence as Exhibit 14. 4 words. Wrong. That single-word conclusion, written by a Grainger County deputy at the end of a 12-hour shift while chasing an unrelated fugitive, is what the federal warrant ultimately traces back to. Think about what Morrow's observation required. It required him to know what a housekeeping cart at 3 a.m. should look like. It required him to find the absence of towels more significant than the presence of supplies. It required him, while running a fugitive, to stop, look twice, and write it down. That is not procedure. That is judgment. And judgment cannot be taught with a checklist. The cart is now in a federal evidence facility in Knoxville. It will remain there for the duration of the prosecution. The federal indictment, returned by a grand jury in the Eastern District of Tennessee on January 30th, 2026, 8 days after the raid, names Renner and 3 co-conspirators. The co-conspirators are identified in public court filings by initials only, pending arraignment. 2 are Tennessee residents. 1 holds an address in northern Georgia. Renner faces charges including federal kidnapping conspiracy, interstate transport of victims, and conspiracy to commit forced labor under Title 18 of the United States Code. The co-conspirators face parallel charges. A 5th individual, identified in the indictment as an unnamed co-conspirator not yet in custody, is described as the entity responsible for establishing Volunteer Property Solutions, LLC, and for arranging the physical modification of the motel rooms. That individual has not been apprehended as of the date this account was compiled. The ledger recovered from the ice machine alcove contains entries spanning October 2025 through January 2026. Federal analysts have confirmed that the shorthand notation corresponds to a tracking system. Which rooms? Which dates? Movement records. Supply schedules. The panel van's routes appear to be represented in the ledger entries by a numerical code that analysts are still working to fully decode. The ledger's earliest entry is dated October 9th, 2025. 3 days after the Roanoke welding student was reported missing. The physical evidence processing that followed the raid extended across 11 days and involved personnel from the FBI's Evidence Response Team, the U.S. Marshals Service, and the Knox County Sheriff's Forensic Unit. The 5-room modified space was documented in its entirety before any items were removed. Photographers worked from a systematic grid pattern, every surface logged by room designation and grid coordinate. The process generated over 4,000 still images and approximately 19 hours of video documentation. Every folding cot, every plastic container, every surface that might carry a fingerprint, a fiber, a biological trace. The forensic processing of the ledger alone required a separate chain of custody procedure. It was photographed in situ, inside the locked utility panel behind the ice machine, before the K9 handler opened the panel door. It was bagged in the field. It traveled under separate evidence seal to the FBI field office in Knoxville, where a forensic document examiner photographed each page individually under controlled lighting before the document analysis unit received it. The rubber band holding the ledger closed was removed and bagged separately. It bore a partial fingerprint. Whether that print has produced an identification is not reflected in the publicly available portions of the case file. The drywall sections removed from the connecting wall frames, the false partitions between rooms 214 and 216, were removed as individual evidence items, numbered, and transported to a federal evidence facility. The construction materials used in the modifications were sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico for material analysis. Court filings indicate that the compound used to skim coat the false walls is a commercially available drywall finishing product, but that the specific batch characteristics may be traceable to a regional supplier. That analysis was ongoing as of the date this account was compiled. Tennessee's LLC registration process does not currently require proof of active business operations, a physical office, or any verification of stated business purpose. A shell company that rents 5 adjoining motel rooms continuously for nearly a year, paying cash every 7 days, operating with no employees, no filings, no activity beyond that rent. That should have triggered some kind of regulatory flag. It did not. The discussion about whether state-level LLC registration reform belongs in the conversation about what enabled Whittle Springs is one prosecutors and state legislators will apparently have after the trial, not before. Whether that discussion produces anything is a different question. The Whittle Springs Motor Lodge was condemned by the Knox County building inspector on January 23, 2026, one day after the raid. The condemnation notice cites the unpermitted interior structural modifications, specifically the removal of load-bearing partition sections between rooms 214 through 220 and the installation of a concealed access door, as the basis for the condemnation order. The motel's owner of record, a Knoxville real estate holding company, with no apparent connection to Renner or Volunteer Property Solutions, was notified by certified mail. The diner remained open. Patty's serves breakfast all day. The counter where Renner sat with his coffee is still there. The motel's other tenants, 19 occupied rooms on the night of the raid, all on the ground floor or the north section of the second floor, were evacuated at 6 a.m. by Knox County deputies and relocated at county expense to a Comfort Inn on the western side of the city. Most were single-occupancy weekly renters. None had any connection to the operation in rooms 214 through 220. Several gave statements to investigators describing that they had noticed the housekeeping cart on multiple occasions, but assumed the second-floor south wing was occupied by a single extended-stay commercial group. Nobody had reported it. That's not an indictment of the other tenants. It's a description of how this kind of operation persists. It looks, from the outside, like nothing. A cart. A van. A light on at 2 a.m. Things that could be explained. Things that usually are. Except once. At 3:14 a.m. on January 22, 2026, a Grainger County deputy with a notepad looked at a housekeeping cart and wrote one word. Wrong. The 17 families who had been searching, the parents, the fiancé, the roommates, the co-workers who'd filed the missing persons reports and updated the flyers and called the tip lines, were notified by federal victim specialists beginning at 7 a.m. on January 22nd. Each notification was made by phone, followed by in-person contact from local law enforcement in the family's jurisdiction. The families were not told the specific location of the rescue until after the next of kin notifications were complete for all 17. Federal protocol. Nobody found out before everyone found out. The welding students' parents were in Roanoke, Virginia, 190 miles from Knoxville. They had last seen their daughter on October 5, 2025, the day before she was reported missing. By mid-morning on January 22nd, she was in a hospital in Knoxville, and her parents were already on I-81 southbound, 3 hours from the city. That drive, 190 miles through the Virginia and Tennessee hills in January, a parent accelerating toward a daughter they hadn't seen in 108 days, is the part of this case that the federal documents don't record. The case file ends at the warrant, at the entry log, at the evidence manifest. It doesn't record the moment a phone rang in a house in Roanoke at 7:12 a.m. and a mother picked it up. The case record is precise. The case record is complete in every way that matters legally, and it has nothing to say about that phone call. The raid itself closed in 47 minutes from first breach to final K-9 clearance. Renner in custody before the sun was fully up. 17 women on their way to 2 hospitals by 6:30 a.m. The motel walkway empty, crime scene tape running the length of the second floor, a federal evidence van in the parking lot with its rear doors open. The housekeeping cart, photograph number 14, had already been bagged. Do you think the deputy knew, when he wrote that note, what he was about to start? Drop your answer in the comments. The procedural aftermath moved on multiple tracks simultaneously. Track 1, The criminal case. Renner arraigned in the Eastern District of Tennessee on January 28, 2026. 3 co-conspirators arraigned the same day. All 4 held without bail. The 5th co-conspirator, the individual identified in the indictment as responsible for establishing volunteer property solutions and directing the room modifications, remains a fugitive. A federal arrest warrant is active. No public description has been released. The warrant is sealed pending what the U.S. Marshals Service describes only as ongoing location efforts. Track 2. The state-level investigations. The Knox County Sheriff's Office and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation opened parallel reviews of the incident reports that had logged the panel van in November and December without triggering a connection. The reviews are not disciplinary in nature. The patrol officers who logged those reports acted within standard procedure. The reviews are structural. Why did 3 incident reports in a 6-month window at the same location not generate a pattern flag in the county's dispatch system? The answer, which emerged in early February 2026, is that the county's incident report software does not automatically cross-reference location within a 1-mile radius across different officer reports, unless a case number is shared. The 3 van sighting reports had 3 different case numbers. The system never linked them. That software gap is now the subject of a county-level procurement review. Track 3. The missing persons reports. Of the 17 women recovered from the Whittle Springs Motor Lodge, 14 had active missing persons reports on file at the time of the raid, 12 with their respective local agencies, 2 with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. 3 had not been formally reported missing. Federal victim specialists are working with those 3 families to document the circumstances of each disappearance. The question of how 17 women were taken from locations as far apart as Chattanooga, Bowling Green, and Roanoke, a geographic spread of roughly 370 miles, and transported to a 42-room motor lodge on a Tennessee state highway without generating a single connected law enforcement alert, is one the federal indictment does not yet fully answer. The ledger recovered from the ice machine alcove is expected to address the transport mechanism when it is introduced at trial. The decoded entries, per court filings, suggest a multi-leg transport system using at minimum 3 separate vehicles across multiple states. The panel van appears to have been the terminal leg only. The rest of the transport chain has not been fully identified. Whether additional individuals beyond the 5 named in the indictment were involved in the acquisition and transport phases is, as of the compilation of this account, an open investigative question. The network may be larger than the Whittle Springs cell. There's a section of the ledger entries from November 2025 that federal analysts haven't released publicly, a portion that doesn't correspond to any transport or supply codes they've identified so far. Whether that section names additional locations, additional individuals, or something else entirely, no one outside the prosecution team knows yet. If you've seen any reporting on that portion of the ledger, drop a comment. This is one of the details worth watching as the trial approaches. Here is what the case record does establish, completely and without ambiguity. A Tennessee 10 most wanted fugitive named Renner was taken into federal custody at 5:44 a.m. on January 22, 2026, at a diner attached to a 42-room motor lodge on State Highway 33, outside Knoxville, Tennessee. He was arrested without incident. He has not spoken to investigators. 17 women, ages 22 to 26, were recovered from 5 adjoining motel rooms that had been physically modified to create a continuous concealed space, rented continuously for 11 months by a shell company with no legitimate business purpose. All 17 are alive. All received immediate medical care. None are identified in this account. 3 co-conspirators are in federal custody awaiting trial. One remains at large under an active sealed federal arrest warrant. The U.S. Marshals Service has not publicly indicated the fugitive's location or estimated proximity to apprehension. The Whittle Springs Motor Lodge has been condemned and is not currently accessible to the public. The plywood board with the weekly rates chalked on it is still in place at the office entrance. Nobody updated it after January 22nd. The ledger is in evidence. The housekeeping cart is in evidence. The thermal imagery from the walkway at 4:44 a.m. is in evidence. Deputy Morrow's pocket notebook, the actual notebook, not a photocopy, is Exhibit 14, Sub-Item A, 4 words on a lined page. Housekeeping cart, room 214-0311. No linens. Water and protein bars only. Wrong. The 5-person network described in the indictment operated for 11 months before that note was written. The indictment does not claim this was the network's first location. The earliest entry in the decoded portion of the ledger is October 9th, 2025. The shell company was registered February 2025. That is a 7-month gap before the first ledger entry. 7 months of operation before October. What happened during those 7 months, at what location, and to whom? That is not in the case file. That is what the 5th co-conspirator knows and has not yet been asked in a courtroom. The network at Whittle Springs is dismantled. The demand that built it has not changed. And somewhere between the February 2025 LLC registration and the October 9th ledger entry, there is a chapter of this case that has not yet been read. The cart is in evidence. The ledger is being decoded. The warrant for the 5th individual is active and sealed. The investigation continues.